Merry meet witches, I'm Gory Movie, and today I'm conjuring up all the gory details on Eyes Without a Face.
Or as it's called in its native language, Les Yeux Sans Visage.
He spoke French.
It's the heartwarming tale of a plastic surgeon determined to give his daughter a new face, and since there are no donors readily available, he's gonna have to get her one the old-fashioned way. The film is one that has unfortunately flown under the radar for many horror fans. It's not talked about much, and it's one that too many have forgotten about or missed out on entirely.
It's not one that you would have seen at the local video store in the 80s and 90s since it didn't get a VHS release until 2001.
And even that was nothing to celebrate, it was heavily censored.
We didn't get an uncut home video release until the Criterion DVD came out in 2004, which is surprising considering that this movie is old enough to get a senior discount at IHOP.
It was released in 1960 at a time when France had yet to regard horror as art. Now, France has since come around.
In fact, I'm sure all French homes have posters of high tension mounted proudly above their fireplaces, and I hear that inside is a popular decor choice for the nursery when you're looking for something gender neutral. However, back in the 1950s, there weren't a lot of horror films coming out of France.
France was like me when I tried to go swimming.
It dipped its toe in the water with films like Carnival of Sinners and Diabolique, but it was still reluctant to dive in.
And no, I don't avoid water because I think I'm going to melt. That's witchist.
Meanwhile, in the pool, you have America swimming out into the deep end with their Vincent Price films, and England skinny dipping with their latest Hammer releases.
Well, French producer Jules Bourquin took one look at the bloody good time they were having and said,
"Challenge accepted."
He set out to bring mainstream horror to France while still maintaining France's reputation for artistic cinema.
He purchased the rights to Jean Redon's pulp horror novel that the movie is based on. He then hired renowned crime novelists Boileau and Narcejac to pen the script. At the time, they were a big deal because they wrote the books that Diabolique and Vertigo were based on.
Now, the novel has long been out of print, so I can't tell you how close the adaptation is, but the movie is still around, so I'm gonna go out on a limb and say the movie did it better.
To direct, Bourquin chose Georges Franju. Now, Franju was mostly a documentary filmmaker. He had just come off his first fictional feature, Head Against the Wall. He had no experience making horror films, so he'd seem an odd choice for the job unless you'd seen his famous documentary, Blood of Beasts. The film is brutal, but strangely poetic in the way it contrasts the peaceful life of rural workers with graphic slaughterhouse footage. It
established many of the trademarks that Franju would bring to Eyes Without a Face. Both were filmed in black and white to make the gore easier to digest, and both used contrasting visuals to illustrate their themes.
To round out the rest of this dream team, Franju reunited with a number of people that he worked with on Head Against the Wall. Notably, he brought in German cinematographer Eugene Schifftan, renowned for the groundbreaking visuals he created as the cinematographer and effects artist on Metropolis. When it came time to make the movie, Bourquin set firm boundaries for Franju. He wanted blood, but not too much or it wouldn't make it past the French censors. No animals tortured or it would upset the English censors. And no mad scientists or it would cause problems with the German censors.
Seems easy enough until you remember that they were adapting a novel about a mad scientist who tortures animals and experiments on women.
He should have been more concerned with the American censors. The movie was released uncut in Europe in 1960, but the American censors took an axe to the picture and released it 2 years later as The Horror Chamber of Dr. Faustus.
Wait, who is Dr. Faustus? There is no one named Dr. Faustus in the entire movie. And I'm not sure what to make of Horror Chamber either. Sounds like a Hostel meets 50 Shades kind of thing.
It was shown as a double feature with the Japanese horror film, The Manster,
which unfortunately is not about a hamster man.
The American distributor's marketing of the film was confusing. There's this poster promising B-movie schlock with the tagline, "Beautiful women were the victims of his fiendish facials."
A fiendish facial?
Sounds like something Gwyneth Paltrow would try. Or this poster that wants you to know that, despite being shown alongside a two-headed creature feature, Eyes Without a Face is a ghastly elegance that suggests Tennessee Williams. Yeah, Tommy Wiseau tried the same thing when he released The Room, and it didn't work for him either.
Leave your stupid comments in your pocket.
The poster also mentions that the film was selected for special showings at the Edinburgh Film Festival.
What it doesn't mention is that 7 people fainted during the screening, prompting Franju to say, Now I know why Scotsmen wear skirts. To which Scotland said,
You just made an enemy for life!
But the real enemies of this film were the critics. The film was panned upon release, and one English critic was nearly fired for writing a positive review. French critics were largely embarrassed by the picture, saying that it was beneath Franju's abilities, with some denying that the film even existed.
So were critics simply hating on Eyes Without a Face because they didn't appreciate horror? Or is there something objectionable about the movie? To understand this film and the controversy it created, let's break down the plot.
The movie opens with the first of many contrasts, a drive down a lonely road on a rainy night set to creepy carnival music. The score is composed by Maurice Jarre, who went on to win a bunch of Academy Awards for epic dramas like Lawrence of Arabia and Dr. Zhivago.
Dr. Zhivago's a pretty big movie, you know?
There are only 6 tracks on the score, and after a while, they do feel a bit repetitive. Especially this first song, which sounds like something an old-timey mime would perform to.
And if there's one thing I hate, it's mimes.
I mean, really, how can you defend yourself against someone with invisible weapons? The only way to defeat a mime is to lock them in an invisible box.
But to do that, you have to be a mime.
The credits run for almost 3 minutes, so you have plenty of time to go make yourself a sandwich. When you return, you'll see a woman driving in the rain. You might think that this is an homage to Psycho, but Hitchcock's film came out 3 months after this one. However, like Marion Crane, the driver is on edge, and for good reason. It looks like she's got Humphrey Bogart propped up Weekend at Bernie's style in the back seat. The dead are notorious for never paying for gas, so naturally, she has no choice but to dump the body.
They'll always have Paris.
Then we're introduced to Dr. Genesee, played by Pierre Brasseur. Brasseur was also in Head Against the Wall, though he was probably best known for his role in the 1945 romance Children of Paradise, about a courtesan who must choose between an actor, a criminal, an aristocrat, and a mime.
I haven't seen the movie for obvious reasons, but it sounds like a setup for the worst game of Marry, Fuck, Kill ever.
The doctor is giving a lecture about a procedure he's developed to transplant a person's face. Now, at this point in history, a full face transplant was still science fiction. He explains that he's been unsuccessful because the host's immune system inevitably rejects the new face and that no one could survive the high levels of radiation required to destroy the antibodies.
As far as the film is concerned, this is just a bit of exposition and foreshadowing, though from a scientific perspective, he's not entirely wrong. It wasn't until breakthroughs were made with immunosuppressant drugs that full face transplants were even possible. Eyes Without a Face envisioned the possibility of a full face transplant decades before it became a reality in 2010.
Though these days you can skip the operation altogether and buy a hyper-realistic mask of someone else's face in Japan.
Yeah, it's nightmare fuel, but it's good to consider your options.
The doctor is called to the morgue to identify the body of his daughter Christiane, who vanished from his clinic where she was being treated for severe facial wounds. The body found in the river has a mangled face, so the coroner and Inspector Poirot have reason to think that it may be Christiane. However, they can't understand why she was in the river wearing nothing but a man's coat in the middle of winter.
Clearly, they've never pledged a sorority or accepted an internet challenge before.
These days, she'd be found dressed as a baby with a belly full of Tide Pods. The wound to the face is also very precise, as though made by a scalpel. What's more, the body matches the description of another missing girl, Simone Tesso.
Seems like they have all the evidence they need. Clearly someone with medical training is to blame, and all the evidence points to Genesee. I'm guessing this is all just a ruse to lure Genesee in and question him.
C'est bien, Christian.
Or they could just believe him and let him go, lending credence to my theory that no matter what country you're in, horror movie cops are dumb.
A funeral is held for Christiane, and we see Genesee standing in between 2 people. One is his protege, Jacques.
Jacques is also Christiane's fiancé, so he's all up in that family.
The other is the sharply dressed dumper of bodies we saw earlier. Her name is Louise, and she works for Genesee.
She's like a really stylish Igor.
She's played by Italian actress Alida Valli. Valli starred in a number of Italian horror films, including the first 2 films of Dario Argento's 3 Mothers trilogy, Suspiria and Inferno. Incredibly, she starred in over 100 films in her lifetime, and was such a boss that during her Hollywood years she was billed simply as Valli. The opening of the movie is set up like a murder mystery, but it's really only a mystery to the cops. All anyone has to do to solve this case is look up the movie on IMDb.
For anyone that's still in the dark, Christiane is alive. Her father was apparently driving like a maniac when he caused the accident that disfigured her face. To make it up to her, he put his surgeon skills to good use and gave her Simone Tesso's face. But it didn't take, so he used Simone's body to fake Christiane's death. He plans to try again, but in the meantime, he'd rather she look more Michael Myers and less Freddy Krueger.
Ton masque. Pour une fois pour toutes. L'habitude de porter ce masque.
So she can't leave the house, she can't see anyone, and she has to wear a mask? I'd sympathize, but we just survived 2020, and I'm willing to bet that she at least has toilet paper.
Louise encourages Christiane to have faith in the doctor. She's devoted to Genesee because he repaired her own face.
All she had to do in return was move into his house, care for his daughter, work at his clinic, kidnap a girl, and hide the body when things didn't go as planned.
Louise puts Christiane's mask on her, and it's truly haunting. If you're thinking that Christiane looks like the kid sister version of Michael Myers, you're not far off. The mask inspired the pale, featureless look of the Shape in John Carpenter's Halloween. Additionally, screenwriter Sam Hum confessed that the mask Alicia wears in Batman was designed to look like Christiane's.
The mask is incredible, simple but chic, and it goes with anything.
It was created from a cast of actress Edith Scobb's face. The material of the mask is very thin, and I like the way it moves when she speaks. Franju tried out a few variations, including a black mask, but I think he made the right call by going with the white one, which contrasts well with the dark, shadowy locations used in the film.
But mostly, I'm just glad they didn't give it blonde hair.
Only Ben Tramer can pull that look off. But what really makes the mask work is Edith Scobb's performance. She uses her large eyes to emote through the mask. Remarkably, this was her first starring role. She previously had a small part in Head Against the Wall. Franju was fascinated by Scobb. He described her as a magic person who gives the unreal reality.
He chose her for Eyes Without a Face because he wanted somebody that audiences wouldn't recognize, introducing them to a new face in more ways than one.
And speaking of new faces, Louise heads to town to stalk a new girl that looks remarkably like Christiane.
She's so thoughtful, taking time out of her busy day to pick up a new face for her favorite masked girl.
The face belongs to Edna Gruber, a Swiss college student looking to see a show and find a room for the night. Louise is an old-fashioned ghoul. She takes Edna out to the theater and buys her a drink before offering her a room where she'll inevitably have her face removed. She even gives her a ride.
Pure class.
But it doesn't take Edna long to realize that something is off at the Genesee estate. Whether it be the sound of the dogs barking or that creepy gnarled tree in the fog, Shufton's camera work is both elegant and unnerving. The film is also very well edited. We're given many scenes like this without dialogue that end a beat or two after the action concludes, lingering on vacant scenery which adds to the picture's overwhelming sense of loneliness.
Louise introduces the doctor as Mr. Domey, though I don't know why. It's not like they're planning on letting her leave.
Edna repeatedly tells her host that she doesn't want to stay the night, but they keep pushing her like they're trying to sell her a timeshare.
Je vous dirai demain. Demain. Il sera trop tard, mon petit.
What she really needs is someone to come in and tell her what we're all thinking.
Get out!
The doctor pours her a drink and ends their verbal tango by chloroforming her. You know, there are easier ways of going about that.
Does this rag smell like chloroform?
Christiane waits for her father and Louise to leave and then sneaks in to peep her new face. She then removes her mask and approaches the table.
That is not how we social distance, young lady.
We see from Edna's point of view our first look at Christiane's face, which looks delightfully gruesome, but does raise a few nitpicky concerns.
Namely, Christiane's entire face is deeply scarred. What happened in that car accident? Did her face go through the windshield? And if the damage was enough to give her full Krueger face, why don't we see scars anywhere else? Hell, how did she manage to keep both her eyes?
We also don't see any trace of injury when Christiane wears her mask. The skin around her eyes and neck previously showed no visible scarring. However, in this scene it looks like she's been using toxic waste as an under-eye cream.
Just between us girls, you are looking a little worn around the eyes.
Which brings us to the infamous surgery scene. What makes this scene so unsettling is not the blood, but the pacing. We watch the operation in real time, making it feel almost like documentary footage. The close-ups on the doctor's and Louise's faces amplify the tension. There's no music, just the sound of the doctor's intense breathing.
The focus of the scene is more on building suspense than a gory reveal. which is good because the makeup effects used on Edna are not nearly as strong as what we saw earlier with Christiane.
It looks like she has chocolate sauce all over her face. You can even see her eyebrows.
By today's standards, what's shown is relatively tame, but it did cause quite a stir in 1960. Unfortunately, American audiences didn't get to enjoy this scene in all its gory glory. The scene was heavily censored, and an uncut version wasn't released in theaters until 2003.
Edna survives the operation and wakes up all wrapped up like the Invisible Man. She looks pretty good considering she just had her face sliced off. I imagine that someone who really had their face removed would look more like Julia in Hellraiser 2.
But what do I know? Maybe she had a whole new face underneath her old one.
That would certainly explain why we can see so much skin beneath her bandages.
Not that it matters, because Edna catches her reflection in the mirror and yeets herself out a window. It's a shame, really. She probably looked really cute under those bandages.
Now the doctor has another body to get rid of, but he doesn't want this one found, so he takes it to the family crypt.
Yes, the same crypt where Simone Tesso is buried in Christiane's coffin. I think a better idea would have been to feed the body to the dogs.
Of which he has many. You see, when the doctor isn't removing layers of skin to get to the Tootsie Roll center of a Swiss college student, he's taking in stray dogs. The doctor runs an animal shelter out of his home, and if that wasn't enough, he also moonlights as a vet. The caged animals mostly serve as symbolism to help us understand Christiane. The doctor thinks he has rescued these abandoned dogs, but he shows them no compassion, making him more their captor than their savior. The doctor describes an inoperable skin condition that one of the dogs has as beastly, which reveals how he views damaged skin like Christiane's face. Likewise, Christiane is also a prisoner.
Rather than accept her condition and provide emotional support, he continues to operate on Christiane and subject her to unimaginable horrors. Which certainly explains why Christiane has more love for the dogs than her own father. But let's check in on Detective Poirot. That's Poirot, not to be confused with Inspector Poirot of the Agatha Christie novels. Poirot would have solved this thing before the opening credits had finished rolling. And yes, I know the body hadn't been dumped yet, he's just that good.
It is as simple as that.
But there's hope for Poirot. One of Edna's friends has come in to give a statement. She tells him that Edna had been spending a lot of time with a woman who wore a pearl choker.
My question is, where was this friend before, and why didn't she offer Edna a face-friendly place to stay? Given that he's a detective, you might expect Poirot to follow up on this lead, but you'd be wrong. Poirot doesn't need this supposed friend and her helpful leads. No, he's more interested in evidence that even Detective Clouseau would have figured out by now.
Both the missing girls were students, they were the same age, and they both had blue eyes. Then, junior detective across the way tells him that the shoplifter he's interrogating also has blue eyes.
Holy balls, I have blue eyes too! Did I have blue eyes before I watched this movie?
The younger detective is played by Pierre Brosseur's son, Claude. He asks what he should do with the shoplifter, and Poirot says to let her go with a warning, but you know, get her address because you never know when that's gonna come in handy.
But young cop isn't about to phone in that warning. No, he's gonna scare this shoplifter straight Prison Mike style.
C'est comme ça qu'on finit ses jours en prison.
Yikes, what the hell did she steal?
I stole, and I robbed, and I kidnapped the president's son.
Don't shoplift, kids, because you will go to prison, and there will be Dementors. The cops are so busy dealing with shoplifters and the growing blue eyes epidemic that they have no time to deal with murderers. So, Genesee enjoys a celebratory dinner with Louise and Christiane.
They eat together as a family, and I'm guessing this is a new thing. Eating while wearing a mask is not as easy as it sounds. But that's all behind Christiane. It's like Leatherface always says, new face, new you.
Though despite having a new face, she's still very much under her father's control. She's less his daughter and more his creation.
Souris, pas trop.
I mean, yeah, I guess he hopes that she's happy, but not at the expense of her face. He worked really hard getting that for her, and as a mother, I understand. I felt the same way when I finally got my son a Turbo Man.
Maintenant tu as ton beau visage, ton vrai visage.
Christiane is the only one of the three able to look deeper than the faces Genesee has created. Louise says she looks angelic, but Christiane sees something much darker.
Je suis devant la glace. J'ai l'impression d'être devant quelqu'un qui me ressemble et qui revienne très loin.
Though in all fairness to Genesee, only being able to see skin deep can be beneficial. Like when you notice that the face you just sewed onto your kid is a little discolored.
Tu as bonne mine, c'est tout.
I can't blame him for not wanting to reveal the truth right away. No one wants to disappoint their kids. That's why my teenage son still believes in the tooth fairy, and why everyone in our neighborhood is missing teeth.
Oh my God.
But Louise sees right through the doctor, and in a beautifully composed shot, she presses him to make a chilling confession.
C'est raté.
Well, we're heading into the final act of this film, so if you don't want the ending spoiled for you, skip to this time code for my final thoughts and rating. Over the course of the next month, the face is rejected and ultimately removed. Having to wear the mask again is too much for Christiane to bear, so either to say goodbye or in a last-ditch effort to cry for help, she calls her fiancé Jacques.
Remember him? The fiancé who hasn't been mentioned for half the movie? Yeah, I forgot all about him too.
But before more can be said, Louise catches her and hangs up the phone. As another example of this movie's far-reaching influence, this scene is recreated in the Ringu prequel, Ring Zero, where Sadako performs in and goes full Carrie on a play called The Mask that is essentially Eyes Without a Face.
Now there's clearly a loose end left dangling here with Jacques, who thinks his dead fiancé just called him. Who's he gonna call? Ghostbusters? The Winchester brothers? Goober and the Ghost Chasers?
No, he's going to Detective Poirot, the most useless detective in all of Paris. Jacques tells him that he heard from Christiane, but the detective says that he needs more to go on. In a poor attempt to illustrate why he can't take Jacques seriously, he shares all of the other statements that he has ignored, including the description of the woman wearing the pearl choker. Jacques, being a triple threat of good looks, a medical degree, and budding detective skills, realizes that the inspector is talking about Louise.
That's not enough for Poirot to bring in Genesee and Louise for questioning, but it is enough to orchestrate an elaborate sting operation.
And good thing, too, because Louise is already on the prowl for a new face.
The plan is to use a blue-eyed girl as bait, and who better than the shoplifter they scared straight earlier?
Beatrice Altereba plays up the dark comedy in the film as Paulette. Poirot is easily able to convince her that she could go to prison for shoplifting, and the only way to avoid doing hard time is to help them out.
And to do that, she's gonna need a makeover.
Qu'est-ce qu'il faudrait que je fasse?
Vous faire décolorer, pour commencer.
Vous dites ça pour rire.
Non, ce n'est pas le genre de la maison.
The plan is to make her look like Christiane and have her pose as a patient. Yeah, they ripped this plan right out of Mr. Ying's playbook, so you can probably already guess how this is gonna turn out.
Those two creeps have got her and the mask.
The plan works and she's admitted to the clinic so that Genesee can run tests. The pacing is much faster in this final act, and it's easy to miss a detail and end up as confused as Paulette.
Un électroencéphalogramme.
Then the doctor leaves to enter a scene that American censors found to be about as objectionable as the surgery scene. The doctor shows genuine compassion and concern for his young patient. American censors didn't want to see the doctor humanized, so they cut the scene entirely from the original US release of the film.
You can show bodies being dumped and women being kidnapped, but having a villain act like a human being is going too far. That said, this isn't the worst decision. The scene doesn't progress the plot in any way, though it does add depth to Genesee's character.
But back to Paulette. Her tests come back and she's given a clean bill of health. The doctor contemplates to himself, and I like that the screenwriter doesn't lazily have him speak his thoughts out loud.
More exposition would have made this third act easier to follow, but I think trusting the actor to tell the story through his expressions was the right move.
Faites-la sortir ce soir. Ça nous libérera un lit. Nous risquons une urgence cette nuit.
This also creates great suspense. There's a moment where it seems like he might have decided to let her go, until Louise rolls up in her face-stealing mobile.
Est-ce que je peux vous déposer quelque part, mademoiselle? Je vais dans votre direction.
Oh, avec plaisir, madame.
Oh, honey. It's easy to place the blame on Paulette for accepting a ride from a creepy stranger, but I blame Jacques and Poirot. Weren't they supposed to be keeping an eye on her?
Poirot calls and Jacques tells him that Paulette left the clinic safely.
Eh bien, ça ne traîne pas dans votre clinique. En tout cas, on ne peut pas dire qu'on les séquestre.
The doc wastes no time. We never see how he got Paulette into his house, but I imagine it went something like this.
Genesee doesn't wait for Louise. He doesn't even have Christine prepped to receive the face. No, he's gonna plunge right into the slicing. But just when you think you might get a bonus surgery scene, Louise finally shows up to tell him that the police are waiting to speak to him at the clinic.
It feels like we're missing a scene here. Didn't Poirot just tell Jacques that everything seemed fine? It doesn't seem like enough time has passed for him to suddenly be concerned. But at least he's finally doing something.
We finally do see Christiane, and she looks like she's reached her breaking point.
She's not even sedated. I'm not sure how this surgery was supposed to work. Movie doesn't have time to explain any of this.
However, it does have time to show the doctor walk all the way to the clinic, which is apparently next door to his home, so at least it's a short walk. He arrives and the cops want to know where Paulette went after she left the clinic, since according to her mother, she never made it home.
And that's the end of the investigation. Jacques even apologizes for wasting Poirot's time.
Bon, ça n'a pas d'importance, docteur. Les fausses pistes, vous savez.
Paulette is on her own. She screams for help, but no one is coming to her rescue.
All the poor girl did was shoplift, and now she's gonna lose her face because the cops in this town are useless.
Christiane is both the most sympathetic and terrifying character in this film. We have no way of reading her face, so when she picks up the scalpel, there's no telling what she plans to do. Lucky for Paulette, she uses the scalpel to cut the restraints.
I do have a few questions. Like, why is Paulette waking up so soon? Wasn't she sedated? And where is Louise? Shouldn't she be attending to Paulette while the doctor is away, or, I don't know, prepping Christiane for surgery?
At any rate, Louise returns from wherever the hell she was to find Christiane with the scalpel ready to stab a bitch. Louise tells her to put it down, but Christiane does that creepy headshake thing and we know she's done for. Louise, however, doesn't see it coming. Louise looks more emotionally wounded than physically as she collapses to the floor with tears in her eyes.
A scalpel in the scar isn't fitting in for the character, but I like that the movie doesn't celebrate this kill. Sure, Louise had it coming, but as monstrous as she was, I can't help but feel sympathy for her. I love the reaction shot we get of Christiane. Her shadow on the wall is just one of many examples of how black and white photography is used to such great effect in this film.
At this point, Christiane is all, "Fuck this shit, I'm out." But before Christiane can blow this popsicle stand, she's gotta release her crew from the clink. Genesee hears the commotion and in typical horror movie fashion, goes to investigate the potential danger. But this dog is still pissed that Genesee called him beastly, so he attacks. The doctor falls to the ground and the rest of the dogs show up to join the fray. Brasser is clearly wearing a lot of padding, but it's not Halloween 4 obvious, so I'm not too bothered. At least his padding serves a purpose.
That said, this scene could have used more blood. This is a fairly blood-light movie, and for what Franju was going for, I dig it, but this is the big finale, so it's time to raid the Hershey supply of all their delicious black and white blood and go nuts. Wait, dogs can't eat chocolate? Dang. You win this round, Franju.
Christiane is a total boss. Like an action hero walking away from an explosion, she pays no attention to her father being torn to shreds. She steps out of that kennel with a dove perched on her hand, echoing the portrait of her seen throughout the film.
Then we get a gnarly shot of Genesee with his eye ripped out, and I just want to apologize to Franju for complaining about the blood earlier.
You go and do something like this
and totally redeem yourself!
We end on Christiane walking into the woods with doves flying all around her like a badass in a John Woo movie. And if that isn't classy enough for you cinema snobs, it even says Finn.
Which this movie uses like a frickin' mic drop. That ending is perfection. A poetic finale to the grim, twisted fairy tale that is Eyes Without a Face. The screenwriters originally intended for either the Doctor or Christiane to be killed by quicklime like something out of a Fulci film. I'm grateful that they didn't go with a more conventional ending. I would have been very disappointed if Jacques and Poirot showed up to save the day. This was Christiane's story, and it feels right that she be the one to end it. You can view the ending as a tragedy, but I gotta say, I'm happy for Christiane.
I like to think that after she left the manor, she walked the earth as a nomad, honing her murder skills and eventually training a young Michael Myers.
If only she could have talked him out of joining the Cult of Thorn when he hit his teenage rebellious phase. Eyes Without a Face is every bit the artistic horror film that Borkin set out to produce. And thanks to re-releases in cinemas and home video, it's now deservedly regarded as a classic, praised for its beautiful cinematography and its notable influence on the genre.
The film has inspired artists all over the world, including Clive Barker, who says Eyes Without a Face is one of his favorite movies. The film's legacy extends to the French extremity films of the early 2000s, walking so films like Martyrs could run. It also heavily influenced 2011's critically acclaimed Spanish film The Skin I Live In, not to mention classics such as Jesus Franco's The Awful Dr. Orloff and Faceless, the Italian film Adam Age Vampire, and the British film Corruption starring Peter Cushing.
Eyes Without a Face is a bona fide classic and easily one of the best horror films in the 1960s. It's not as scary as all the controversy would lead you to believe, but it is very unsettling. It's a darkly poetic film with haunting, unforgettable visuals. It won't make you jump out of your seat, but you will have a hard time shaking it.
I give Eyes Without a Face an A-.
Well, that's it for me, witches. I want to thank William Ellman for requesting this review and supporting the channel on Patreon. If you like this video, please hack that thumbs up button, and for more gory goodness, be sure to subscribe and ring that bell. And until we meet again, wear your mask, and blessed be.